When you first go in, there are any ratings that were given already by other attendees. Just click on that, select however many stars you want, and then you have a place to put in comments. So we're going to do instead of a survey after PDD, this is how we're going to get the feedback. There's a place to do it for the general PDD. There's a list of questions, and then each session will have the ability to, from 1 to 5 stars in a comment, give feedback. All right. There's Devin.
Cool. Thank you, Mary Beth. Okay, let me first say, if you're sitting outside of the roped areas, I don't know who you think you are. What are you doing over there, man? Come on. Yeah, you're working. You're working here. Okay, all right. The ropes are so we can sort of bring this in for a little more intimate time for the breakout. So we would ask if you guys sitting outside could move inside. That would be great. We would appreciate that so much. Okay, we're going to bring Dr. Paul Schempp back up. But first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the breakout. So, your success as a project manager is largely dependent on your ability to make sound decisions and avoid disastrous decisions. But how do you avoid making poor choices? How do you consistently make great decisions? And how do you make the great decisions when the pressure is really on? Those questions will be answered today. Our speaker is an expert on developing expertise. Again, if you weren't here before, he's as a University of Georgia research professor. He studies top decision makers from all walks of life. And as a consultant, he helps organizations turn people with potential into outstanding decision makers. Here to speak on Under Pressure, Secrets of Superior Decision Makers is Dr. Paul Schempp.
Thank you, Devin. Yes, come on over. In fact, if you come down front, they've got power strips. So if you're looking to plug in, great place. And also very good-looking people, too. Do you ever have to make any decisions as a project manager? Basically, that's your job description, isn't it? Well, let me suggest this to you. Do you realize that everything you have, everything you will ever have, or everything you've done or will ever do, is directly dependent on the decisions you make? And so if you want to have things that you really appreciate, if you want to accomplish things that are going to give you deep sense of satisfaction, then probably the quality of your decisions is going to be really important to you. Now, question. Sometimes we think that our life is controlled by circumstances outside of our own control. What if, for example, you won the lottery Wednesday night? $94 million. Nobody's smiling. You've never fantasized about that? What I'd like you to do now at your table, would you share with other people, it doesn't have to get too personal, you won the lottery, what would you do? Go ahead. All right, I'm a university professor, so it's been a little while. I feel like I'm obligated to give you a quiz. So here's the quiz. What percentage of major lottery winners, definition of major lottery winners, $1 million or more? We're talking $94 million Wednesday night. What percentage of major lottery winners go bankrupt? Would you think it's 25, 35, 50, or 70%? High number? You'd be right. 70%. Look around this room for a little bit. If everybody in this room was a major lottery winner, within a few years, usually it's 5 or less, 7 out of the 10 people in this room would be bankrupt. In other words, you would have less money having won that lottery than you do right now. Do you think that's a result of good decisions or bad decisions? Bad decisions. And that's where I wanted to start, talking about decisions under pressure, the science of decision making, if you will. Because science does show us why we make good decisions and why we make poor decisions. And here are the reasons we tend to make bad decisions. First, we have biases. There's certain things we like, certain things we don't like. I'm going to guess when you were sharing with the people at your table the things you were going to do with that lottery money, it really indicated your biases probably towards things you really enjoyed doing or having. But we also make decisions that we're biased towards. For example, those of you that might be in a position to hire somebody. If somebody applies for a job, and I'm just going to give you an example, and they went to the same institutions that you went to, probably you're going to be more inclined to hire them than somebody that went to another institution. All right? For example, if you're a KU alumni and a K-State alumni shows up, yeah, you get the picture. All right. You're unprepared. In other words, you just didn't anticipate having to make this decision now. So you may not have the skills that you need to do what needs to be done in this decision. Or it's a situation you're completely unfamiliar with. I think about those poor people, for example, in Houston, when Harvey blew through. Many of them were simply unprepared for the magnitude of that hurricane. In Georgia, we had a similar effect with Irma last week. Most of us were fairly fortunate when we looked south to what happened to the people in Florida, especially the Florida Keys. Again, many of those people unprepared for the magnitude of the hurricane that they faced. Because people in Florida and Texas face hurricanes all the time, just not like that. What about limited information? As project managers, don't you sometimes face a situation where you just didn't have the information you needed? Have you ever said to yourself, oh, if only I had known then what I know now, the decision would have been a little bit different. All right, number 4 is the number one reason experts make bad decisions. Let me say that again. Number 4, overconfidence is the reason experts make bad decisions. They think, I've seen it all. You've heard people say this. I've seen it all. I've done it all. So this is the answer. This is the solution. And they don't do their homework. They're overconfident, and it comes to bite them. And then finally, emotions. I want to talk a little bit about emotions because of all of those, neuroscience has given us suggestions on how you can make emotions not cause quite as many bad decisions for you. Now, these are the 5 emotions that science indicates leads to the worst decisions. When you're angry, right? For example, you've heard of road rage. Somebody gets angry and they completely overreact. The decisions are really unreasonable. Right? Or you have a fear. So maybe you do something or you don't do something simply because you're scared. You're considering an investment in a new house, for example. Now all of a sudden you're going to have a huge mortgage payment and you're just not sure you can handle that. Fear. Sadness. Sadness tends to disarm us, can sometimes lead to depression. And so we're really not, if you will, in the best frame of mind to make good decisions when we're sad. We're a bit vulnerable. Ever been disgusted? You just didn't want to have anything more to do with, you fill in the blank, this client, this colleague, whoever it might be. And so you make decisions that really aren't in your best interest because you just want to end the situation now. Or finally, you feel guilty. My son-in-law, daughter-in-law is applying for this job, and out of guilt, I feel like I gotta hire them even though somebody else is more qualified for it. So you feel guilty if you don't do it, or you feel guilty if you do it. So you make a decision. Now, this comes from a dear friend of mine who I consider a brilliant neuroscientist. Her name is Dr. Debbie Cruz, and she's at the Arizona State University. And what you see up there are 4 brain scans or brain images, if you will. It's the same brain. Let me just explain a little bit about the brain to you. Some of you may know this, so apologies if I'm being repetitive here. But if you look at it, most of you will realize that the front of the brain is actually at the top of the image. All right. In fact, those little bumps up there are right here. It's called the prefrontal cortex. And if you think about your skull, it's the thickest part of your skull. It's the part where we do most of our analytic thoughts. Most of the logic takes place up here in the prefrontal cortex, those little bumps that you see there. All right. Notice that there's a left side of the brain and the right side of the brain. Theory says that there are left brain people and right brain people. You've heard that, yes? Yeah. Recent research, particularly out of the University of Pittsburgh, is saying that's really not true. That somebody may have a proclivity to being more creative, that would be right brain, or more logical, that's left brain. But what we find with people is that we need and use both. So you have to recognize that. Now, what you're seeing is the top of the brain, called the cerebral cortex, basically, kind of that gray, ugly matter that we see folding that we call the brain. That's where most of our decisions are made. Now, you'll also see that there's words learning and alpha. There are brain waves. And the alpha waves are most associated with learning. In other words, when you're trying to learn something, those alpha waves are very active. And if you look at the lower part of the slide, you'll see beta waves. Particularly what you'll see are beta 2 waves. Pure beta waves or beta 1 waves really are associated with simple decisions. Like, gee, do I want to have fruit or do I want to have a bagel? I really want that croissant out there or that pastry. I'm going to have coffee or tea. Fairly simple decisions. That's beta 1. Now, when it needs more analysis, more in-depth thinking, then it starts to convert into beta 2. And so that's why I chose the beta 2, because that's really, as project managers, you have to carefully think about outcomes of projects or strategic thinking. So that's really active. All right, with that done, let me tell you what you're actually looking at. Same person under 2 different conditions. The left side that you see there, the emotional, that person was highly agitated. And it was, in this context, it was a sport context. There was a lot of pressure put on this person. There was a lot of fear that was brought into this person's reality. It had to do with a putting stroke, those of you that know golf. All right? If this happens, then there's going to be significant consequences, so there was fear. Now, when your brain is in a highly emotional state, notice the red, the yellow, even the green. What this means is that it's a measure of voltage. The red means that you're at the high end of the voltage, usually about 5 volts. Right? When that occurs, right, your brain is 5 times stronger than when you're in a calm state. Now, in order to think well, you need to be in a calm state, and I'll explain that in a minute. But your brain is much more powerful in an emotional state. That's why when you're highly emotionally charged, you feel energy. Because here's the second thing that happens. You release hormones. Most of you are probably familiar, you feel more an adrenaline rush. That's called norepinephrine. Right? Makes the heart go faster. In certain cases, you might even be stronger. You've heard of, for example, of somebody in a fearful situation lifting a car up. That can actually happen because of what's going on in the brain. That high voltage is very strong. Here's the other thing that happens when that occurs. It's very fast. And so when you're in a highly emotional state, you want to make a decision almost instantaneously. You're angry and you lash out, probably later to regret what you said. Because here's the final thing that happens. In an emotional state, it releases a hormone called hydrocortisone, otherwise known as cortisol. Some of you have probably heard of cortisol. It doesn't do a lot of good things for the body. In this particular case, here's what it does. It leaks over into the prefrontal cortex, up to those little bumps up there. And it actually inhibits the ability of the neurons to fire there. Because here's what the body's doing. In a highly emotional state, you get into a sense of fight or flight, this or that. And the brain is saying, this is time for action. And we don't want you to overthink it. So it dumps that cortisol into that part of the brain that actually inhibits your ability to think clearly. That's a phenomenon, and you're seeing it demonstrated right there. That's what neuroscience is teaching us. So here's the take-home lesson. When you feel like you're in a highly agitated state, you're angry, you're fearful, you're disgusted, you're guilty, take time to calm down. Don't make the decisions. Don't take the actions, and certainly don't verbalize what you're saying, thinking. Right? Yeah, somebody's mumbling up here. I guess we're guilty of that, aren't we? Yeah. Exactly. Because when you think clearly, when you think analytically, you need low voltage impulses in order for the brain to function properly in an analytic sense. It's not trying to make a quick decision. Many of you have said, I need time to think about this. And you're right, you do. Because clear thinking is a slow process. Emotional thinking is a fast process. See the difference? Now, just because you're calm, just because you're ready to think logically, doesn't mean it's going to lead to a good decision. Decision making is a skill. And I'm going to talk about two types of decisions now. One is called analytics decisions, where we need some level of analysis, and the other will be intuitive. How do we use intuitive thinking? So let's start with analytic decisions. First of all, and I'm guessing in your work as project managers, this is really the kinds of decisions that your success depends upon. And so you need to focus on data and detail. You need information, you need facts. In order to be a rational, logical analysis, you need this information. When you're in an agitated state or unprepared, you don't have those facts. An anger reaction does not use rational thinking. Analytic decisions you do. So you're going to need the data, you're going to need the detail. Skillful project managers know what data they need and what data they don't need. All right, I'll talk about that in a second. It's also a rational analysis. It means that there's a process that you go through. Here's first, second, third, and fourth thing you do. Something else. Analytic decisions are best when this is what you have to do. You have to solve a problem. Or you need to determine a strategy. For example, you're an IT project manager. Before you begin a project, you have to have a strategy, right? I see people shaking your head. Of course you do. That requires analytic decisions. And finally, you have to be able to predict the future. Yeah, you're probably thinking, wait a minute, I could predict the future? Yes, you can, and I'm going to show you how. Now, that doesn't mean you should be booking flights to Las Vegas, because you won't be able to predict what card is going to flip over next. But you will be able to determine what level of success you'll experience with certain projects or hiring experiences. Let's start with solving problems. This is research that we've done fairly extensively with different groups at the University of Georgia. And I was trying to think how to describe the difference between the two styles of decisions that I was seeing. Now we were comparing experts in their field and we were comparing novices. And I just couldn't come up with the right terminology until one night I was reading Sherlock Holmes. Do we have any Sherlock Holmes fans in here? Ah, yes, of course, good. And I was reading one of the stories where Watson is talking to Sherlock about how he analyzes or processes cases that is different from Lieutenant Lestrade, the guy from Scotland Yard. And Holmes laughs and he says, Lestrade thinks backwards. Watson asked him what he was talking about. He says, Lestrade walks into a crime scene, kind of scans it, comes to a conclusion. Has this ever happened to you? Comes to a conclusion, then looks for all the evidence that's going to support that conclusion. And he said, I'm a forward thinker. I walk into the crime scene and I try to identify all the evidence and I try to put it together in a way that will lead me forward to the solution or to the criminal. So that's the difference. And I know we experience this in our own lives. Think of this. You ever walk into a store and you see a jacket and you say, I gotta have that jacket. You know, fall's coming, that jacket would be perfect. And the colors, they're gonna match the things that I have. It's a stylish jacket too. If I wear this to the game or out to a party, people are gonna think I'm fairly fashionable. So what do? You buy the jacket. You take it home. You put it on. Yeah, somebody's shaking his head already. And you realize, boy, I made a bad decision. Right? And if you're a guy, what you're gonna do is you're gonna hang it up in your closet and hope you never see it again. If you're a woman, you're a little smarter. You're going to take it back and really get what you needed in the first place. That's backward decision. In other words, I make the conclusion, and now I'm trying to think of all the reasons to justify it, all the evidence. And so when you find yourself doing that, realize that you're thinking backwards, trying to justify a solution. Or you hear somebody on your team doing that, justifying a decision that was made. Let a little bell go off. That's probably not the direction you want to go. You want to go in the other direction. Yes, fall is coming up. I look in my closet and I do need a jacket. What kind of jacket do I need? Well, I might need a jacket to go with these slacks and this shirt. Fashion's coming up. I don't know much about it. So maybe I'll go online and I'll look to see what's available. Or I'll watch other people and see what kind of jackets, for example, John's wearing. I like that jacket. Talk to John about that. Where'd you get the jacket? What'd you pay for it, if you don't mind my asking? So now I'm going to be able to think forward, and I realize that's really the jacket that I need. John even lets me try it on. Right? It does look good. All right? I think I could do this. Right? Maybe I'll sneak off with it because I'm leaving for Atlanta. John won't catch me. No. That's forward thinking. I'm looking for all the evidence to come to a conclusion in the front. All right, and this is how it works. It's a process, it's logical. This won't seem like rocket science to any of you. The first thing you need to do to solve a problem is to define the problem. The second thing is you have to recognize the factors that are causing the problem. Because once you recognize the problems that can be corrected, now you're on your way to solving it or identifying the solution. And then the last phase is you implement the solution and evaluate it. Most of you think that way, yes? Okay, now, here's the difference between the way the great decision makers think and the average decision makers make. First is in the first step. Research, again, from the University of Pittsburgh shows that expert decision makers spend more time defining the problem than the novices do. Again, think about backward decision making. They already think they know what the problem is. No. Experts spend more time defining it. And let me give you an example. This comes from a study that we did in Major League Baseball. Because of the terms of the research study, I can't tell you the team and I can't tell you the players. But I just will say it was a highly successful team and it was not the Kansas City Royals. All right? Even though, yes, they have a superb team, they have a great history. So I have to kind of hats off to you for that. But here's what happened with this team that I'm talking about. In spring training, they had a rookie. By the way, if you don't know anything about sports or baseball or don't care about it, you'll still get the point here. They had a rookie in spring training that they thought had a great potential. But he had a wonderful spring. Originally, they thought they were going to send him on a minor league team, so it was really a decision, do we send him to rookie ball or A-level ball? Where do we really send him? Well, he had such a great spring that they had to put him on the major league roster, and they took him up north with them. And after a week or two, they got him into a game, and he started playing very well. in particular his batting was just red hot. And so by the end of May, he was actually leading the league in hitting average, a rookie that they weren't expecting much. And so, but what happened is by the end of June, his batting average had dropped to from about 350 down to about 300. By early July, it was down just under 300, high 200s. By mid-July, it was down in the low 200s. Now, those of you that know something about baseball, this starts happening to a rookie, and what do you usually do? Exactly, you send him back down to the minors. This manager said, no. He said, I got to find the problem. I got to figure out what's going on with this kid. Now, this kid was Latino and did not speak, basically could say yes, no, and thank you, and wasn't sure when he was supposed to use which word when. So he had one of the veterans players, who was also Latino, speak to this kid and said, find out what's going on. Well, 2 days later, the veteran came back and said, in June, his girlfriend moved up from the country they're from. Within 2 weeks, she became very, very ill. They didn't know what was wrong. And so they tried to get her into a doctor, but neither one could explain what was going on because they didn't speak English. So he took her home and tried to buy over-the-counter medication. And he even asked some of the other players what helps cure people here in America. Well, by the end of July, he thought this girl was going to die. So is there any reason that his batting average should stay where it was? What do you think he was thinking about? Of course he was.